So if you're into pizza making, I'm sure you've heard it before.
This is my pizza stone. You really need one of these.
With a pizza stone, you can make great New York style pizzas or Chicago tavern style pizzas right on the stone.
When I started baking pizza at home, one of the first things I did was buy a pizza stone.
Some of us might have even said it ourselves. But now, after baking tons and tons of pizzas over these last few years, I'm here to tell you that pizza stones are probably the biggest lie out there when it comes to home pizza making. I mean, don't get me wrong, in professional pizza ovens, stones are necessary. Since they retain heat really well, they allow busy pizzerias to bake pizza after pizza without having to wait for the baking surface to recover in temperature. But that's not why most people recommend using stones at home. Most people say it's because they help transfer heat to the bottom of the pizza, which will in turn crisp it up. However, that heat transfer, also known as thermal conductivity, is actually something that stones aren't great at. And that's by design. It's another reason why stones are traditionally used in high temperature ovens. Since they don't transfer heat super quickly, you don't have to worry as much about the bottom of the pizza burning at those higher oven temperatures. At home though, it's a whole different story. Since home ovens don't get as hot as commercial pizza ovens, we actually need a little boost, which stones just can't provide. And to prove it, I'm gonna perform a little experiment. So this here is a baking steel. And since it is so dense, it can actually hold on to a lot more heat per volume than a pizza stone. But that's not the main thing we care about. The main difference is that it also transfers heat super efficiently. Its thermal conductivity is about 20 times higher than that of a pizza stone, meaning that it can transfer a lot more heat to the bottom of the pizzas, even at lower oven temperatures. But you don't have to take my word for it. Let's see it in action. So for this experiment, I placed both my baking steel and my pizza stone in the oven. Then I let them preheat at 550 degrees Fahrenheit for a full 90 minutes to let them get fully saturated with heat. Since I couldn't fit both on the same oven rack, I had to bake one at a time. So first I baked on my baking steel for 5 minutes, and I intentionally didn't rotate the pizza during the bake time in order to keep things as consistent as possible. Then I removed my steel and moved the stone up to that same oven rack and gave it a few minutes to get fully up to temperature. Then I launched the pizza onto my preheated stone and baked for 5 minutes, again without rotating the pizza, and by the time it was done baking, the results were pretty clear. You know, I mean, it's pretty obvious even just looking at them from the top. The stone-baked pizza just didn't get nearly as well done as the steel-baked pizza. Again, they were baked for the exact same amount of time. I let the oven fully preheat in between bakes, and this is consistent with other testing I've done in the past, which is why I switched to steel in the first place. I mean, the stone-baked pizza is just completely undercooked, where the steel-baked pizza, I mean, it looks pretty much perfect. It's not too darkly charred, you know, depending on your taste, you might want a little more charring, but we can see when we cut into it, I mean, you can just hear that crispness, and the slice, if you just give it a little crease, has a perfect structure. Whereas the stone-baked pizza, it's got a little crispness around the edges, but you can tell the center pretty floppy, and you know, no matter how hard I try to crease it, I can't get it to stand up. I mean, you can kind of get it to stand up sturdy if you really fold it, but I can't get it to stand nearly as sturdy as with the other one. So let's give them a try. Steel-baked pizza and the stone-baked pizza. I mean, it's still good pizza, like it's good dough, high quality ingredients, but it just doesn't have nearly as nice of a texture. It's got a little bit of crispness surprisingly, but just definitely lacking in depth of flavor and not nearly as crisp as I would personally like it. I think if we had cheese and all that on top of this as well, that extra weight and kind of sogginess from the ingredients would take away from the crispness even more. But with that said, obviously steel is still quite a bit more expensive. So is it actually worth the price difference? Personally, I do think it's 100% worth it. I mean, the results here speak for themselves. And if you bake a lot of pizza at home, it's definitely a significant improvement in quality. And since I am such a big fan of baking steel and have been for a while, I've actually been able to get a discount code for my viewers. So you can use the code Charlie10 along with the link in my description below to get 10% off your order. To be fair though, this video isn't sponsored. They've never paid me, never even asked to be mentioned. And I even bought my own baking steel at full price with my own money. The one I use these days is the Baking Steel Pro. The reason I like it is because it's 16 by 16 inches, and it's also a little bit thicker than the Baking Steel Original, which honestly for most people doesn't matter a ton unless you frequently bake pizza after pizza, because that thicker steel helps with the recovery time. But again, I think the main advantage of the Pro is just to be able to bake larger pizzas. However, even with the discount, I know that it's not within reach for everybody, so what I still want to know is if we can get this stone to work just as well, or at least pretty close, with a few modifications in our baking process. So before we we get into that, I need to do one more thing because I can't just eat pizza all the time. I mean, I guess I could, but I probably shouldn't. And that's where this video's sponsor, Factor, comes in. Factor provides delicious, nutritious meals that can be heated and ready to eat in as little as 2 minutes, which is perfect for me because I'm really trying to make it a priority this year to eat healthier. And as much as I'd love to make all of my meals from scratch every single day, that's just not really feasible for those of us with busy schedules, which, let's face it, is pretty much all of us these days. So Factor's meals are delivered fresh, never frozen to your door, and they offer meals for a variety of different diet preferences. Between keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie options, and my personal favorite, which is their protein plus meals. They always have the perfect balance between the veggies that I'm trying to eat more of, and the protein that I need to build muscle and to stay in shape. And all of their meals have the nutrition info conveniently listed right on the package, so it's easy to know exactly what I'm consuming. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so they're convenient, healthy, and delicious. Well, they've got to be expensive, right? Well, no, they're actually less expensive than most takeout meals you'd get, and the meal plans range between 4 to 18 meals per week, so you can customize them to your exact needs, and you can always skip a week if you need to as well. They also offer snacks, smoothies, and more, so head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code CharlieAnderson50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. So thanks a lot to Factor for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to making some pizza. So for this next test, I baked another 2 pizzas. The first one I baked on my Baking Steel Pro, which I set on my oven's second highest rack, as that's what I found to work best after baking probably hundreds of pizzas with this thing. So I bake on my oven's highest temperature, 550 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 3 minutes, and then crank the broiler onto high and bake for another 1 to 2 minutes. Then for the second pizza, I started with my pizza stone on the oven's lowest rack. The reason being that since the oven's heat source is at the bottom, the stone will get significantly hotter down there, which might just help it to perform to my liking. So again, I baked this pizza for 3 minutes at 550 degrees Fahrenheit, and then cranked on the broiler for the last 1 to 2 minutes to get some heat from the top, again rotating at some point throughout. And here's what we're working with. Now looking at the bottoms of the pizzas, they actually both look quite good. It might be a little hard to tell on camera, but personally I do still think the steel bottom looks a little bit better. It's got slightly darker charring in spots, and just feeling it, it feels a little bit more crisp and sturdy. But of course this is all just speculation. The true test will be once we cut into it. Crunch test. Pretty solid. Now the stone baked pizza. Pretty similar. Again, it seemed like maybe a little less crunch with the stone pizza, but we'll see what it's like once we bite into it. Yeah, so I definitely think they are both acceptable pizzas. There's no question. The steel baked pizza is just a little bit better. The steel one just seemed to get a little bit better oven spring, like I said, with those nice charred bubbles on the top from being closer to the broiler. And that's where my main problem with the stone is. I mean, you can get a pretty good result, but you kind of have to choose between the bottom being nicely cooked versus the top. Again, because to get the bottom cooked, you have to put it as low as possible in your oven, but for the broiler to cook the top, you want it to be as high as possible in your oven. With the steel, you can have the best of both worlds because it can still crisp up the bottom even on those higher oven racks. Now there are ways around that with the stone. The main one I could think of would be to bake for maybe 3 minutes on the oven's bottom rack and then slide the pizza up to the top rack right under the broiler to get the top finished off. Problem with that is since you're taking the pizza off of the stone, it's not going to crisp up the bottom quite as nicely. So what you would then need to do is probably let the pizza cool for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then reheat the slices on the stone in order to crisp them back up. That's a technique I use for my New York style pizza recipe as well, although I actually do it using a steel, because even with that reheat method, I do think you get better results with the steel. But my point is that you could at least make it work with the stone. Despite that though, I still think that it never really makes sense to buy a stone for at-home use. But stone is a lot less expensive, so wouldn't that alone potentially make it worth it? Based on my previous testing, I found another method that works as good or possibly better than a stone, and it requires equipment that you should already have if you own an oven. The trusty baking tray. So what I tried first was just building the pizza straight on this tray without preheating it or anything, and then just sliding it into the oven. And while the result wasn't bad, it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I still think the stone achieved a slightly better crispness on the bottom, definitely some better color as well. Although whether or not it's worth purchasing that extra piece of equipment, I guess is up to you. With this second method, I'm pretty happy with the results here. You can see the bottom has a super nice crispness. Not quite as nice as the steel, but probably better than the stone. We'll have to see when we bite into it. But what I did was basically just preheated the baking sheet. So I threw it in my oven on the bottom rack, preheated at my oven's highest temperature, and then just slid it onto the sheet like I would would if it were a steel or a stone. And for me, I did flip the baking tray upside down just to prevent the pizza from catching on the edges or anything like that, but it's kind of up to you. One thing to note is that baking your baking tray at super high temperatures like this can cause it to kind of darken. For me, I've kind of just accepted the fact that this thing is seasoned to the high heavens, but if that's gonna bother you, then it might not be a method you want to use. But as we know, the visuals don't always tell the whole story, so let's cut into it and see what we're working with. Yeah, so just as I expected, this thing is at least as good, if not better than the one I baked using my baking stone. Definitely not as good as the baking steel, because another thing to note is that I also baked this for 6 minutes to get it to the proper level of doneness, which is what I did for the stone, but with the steel I only had to bake for 5 minutes. And another advantage of the baking tray method is that you can pretty easily slide the baking tray up to the top rack toward the end of baking to get it closer to the broiler. And that was a big part of, I think, what helped me to get this nicer charring on the top, which I wasn't really able to get with the stone. Now obviously you could try to shift the stone up as well, but it's a little bit riskier. Stones are pretty fragile when they're hot. Personally, I've even broken 1 or 2 in the past, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. So anyways, what's my conclusion here? Well, for me personally, I think there's absolutely no reason to buy a pizza stone. I think that for anyone who's really a home pizza enthusiast, they should probably just save up for a baking steel. And if you don't care that much, or you can't afford it, or you don't want to do that, I would just recommend sticking with the baking tray, at least for baking these sort of New York style pizzas. Obviously, you can always bake in a pan. Carbon steel, cast iron, even stainless steel all work really well. But of course with those, you're kind of baking a different style of pizza because there you're getting into the pan pizza territory. Now the other thing to note is that I do have a gas powered oven, which sometimes are maybe a little more powerful than an electric oven. So for those of you that have an electric oven, go ahead and give this method a try and let me know in the comments how it turns out. I mean, I'm hoping it would work well for every type of oven, but since I don't have an electric oven, I really don't have any way of knowing for sure. And if you want to see my preferred baking steel method in action, you can check out this video right here where I attempted to make an entire pizza for under $1. And in that video, I explained my entire usual baking process in complete detail. So anyways, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.